Social media has changed a lot over the last decade. What was once a place to share photos and memories has really morphed into memes, reels, and a bulletin board for opinions, political or otherwise. If you think your social media is rough, imagine being the leader of a political party. It doesn't matter where you sit politically, you cannot escape it. Since the federal election, Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe's social media posts have been flooded with comments from angry Conservative voters. Some of them suggesting we separate from Canada. Others tell him to follow Alberta Premier Danielle Smith's lead to make it easier to hold a referendum. So, how much power do politicians give to keyboard warriors? And what is the toll of the constant stream of trolling on the people who are trying to balance the needs of the province? Since January, Shannon Andrews has been working with Upstream Strategy Group. She's a principal there, which basically means she's a consultant, and people come to her because of her experience. In 2017, Shannon was the co-chair of the campaign that helped Scott Moe win leadership of the Sask Party, then became his chief of staff. To say she's seen it all is an understatement. Shannon, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
So how are you? What's life like for you these days?
Life is good. Definitely a little less intense than it was when I was working as a political staffer. But yeah, it's very good. It's allowed me a little bit of more time to be a mom, which has been fantastic, and really interested in delving into this new world of consulting and doing some political strategy work on the side too.
What does a chief of staff do? What does that mean?
Well, I would say this. Primarily, it's air traffic controlling. It was my responsibility to make sure all of the parts that are happening in the legislative building, on the political wing at least, were moving in sync. It was making sure the staff were feeling supported. It was making sure caucus was feeling supported. And then a big part of it is issues management, troubleshooting. Anything can happen in politics on any given day.
How much responsibility do you have for helping guide and steer the way those decisions are made?
I would say at that level, the chief of staff level or senior advisor level, I had a tremendous amount of input, which I always appreciated. At the end of the day, though, most policies, most priorities went to the caucus room. Led by the Premier, he was and still is very interested in the elected members' opinions and wants to have their feedback before any decisions are being made.
Do you think you could do that job if you didn't have any input?
Oh, that's a great question. You know what? I'm not sure if I could. It's hard to imagine that because in the circumstances I was in, I worked for a premier and for a caucus who very much wanted to hear the opinions of the senior staff members, any staff member. So it's hard to imagine a world where that wouldn't happen because they were always so open to hearing the feedback.
Do you remember a time where you were really against something that they were doing?
I have to be honest. No, I don't remember a time where, ideologically or personally I felt against something. That's not to say that there haven't been a lot of hard decisions to make. And, any staff member or elected official grapples with those. It's hard to make everybody happy. At the end of the day, you just have to hope you are making the best, most informed decision.
So why did you leave?
Oh.
They had just won an election.
Definitely.
You could have easily had 4 more years.
Easily. Very proud of that election win. We worked very hard in a new landscape, I would say. It was a very challenging election for the Saskatchewan Party. Very proud of that win. It was just a little bit of timing. I had been thinking about what was next after this particular role. Being fully honest, I just wanted to have a little bit different of a work-life balance. Some days I was more interested in, I guess, being a hockey mom and being able to do that without my phone ringing off the hook. So it was really just came down to that. It was just kind of the right time.
So what is your job now?
My job now, as you mentioned, I work for Upstream Strategy Group. So we are a consulting firm that works with a variety of different clients who are looking to engage with government at all different levels, municipal, provincial, and federal, to advance some of their priorities, their ideas, partner with government on different things. And despite the fact that you and I probably know a lot about the inner workings of government, most regular people don't. And they often need assistance of how to engage and work their way through that process.
How helpful are your connections still in that building when it comes to people who need to lobby or need help with those connections?
I think they are very helpful. It's even less about who you know, and it's just more about understanding how the system works. And so I try to help clients, again, with navigating the system that can be very daunting, which is government. And I think it's that, I have almost 18 years of experience in government. It's just understanding who's who in the zoo, who do you talk to, how do you advance things. So I think it's been helpful so far.
Who are the people that are paying you to help navigate the system? Who comes to you?
It's a wide variety. It's a number of different organizations, frankly, across Canada. Upstream's client base is predominantly at this time out of Ontario. So it's a lot of Ontario-based companies that really are from across the spectrum of industries and professions, a lot of which are now looking towards Western Canada to whether that's move their operations out here, expand operations into Western Canada, or advance some of the work they're doing in Western Canadian provinces. So it's been very exciting, actually, to see the interest.
Is it typically because the Saskatchewan Party is considered a conservative government? Is that something that they would come to your consulting firm for as well? I noticed a number of the people that you work for all kind of fall into that political lean, we'll call it.
Yes, they do. We will admit we're a little unabashedly conservative. I think that probably does have something to do with it. But most of our clients are less interested in talking about the politics and more, again, about how to navigate the system. It doesn't really matter who's in government, what your political ideology is. You still have to work with governments to engage them and partner with them on initiatives.
Okay. Let's talk about social media.
Sure.
There are a lot of angry people commenting on Scott Moe's Facebook and X pages right now. This is not the first time. This is his chief of staff. You were chief of staff during the pandemic.
Yes.
Take me back to that time. What was that like?
It was hard. There's no other word for it. It was hard. It was hard. I think hard for everybody. Speaking of trying to get things right and make people happy, it was frankly almost impossible during that time. We were making really difficult decisions, frankly, at a really fast pace. Governments don't tend to work that quickly. No disrespect, government, but that's just normally how it is. And during COVID, we didn't have that luxury. You had to be making decisions at a very quick pace because the landscape was changing every day. So it was really difficult. You had to try to balance off what you were hearing on social media up against what, the elected folks were hearing from the other different forums, which, traditionally was phone calls, letters, emails, chatting with folks on Coffee Row. That still exists today. Social media has become another one of those forums, though.
What kind of toll do those big events, those big decisions, whether it is COVID, whether it is what's become colloquially known as the pronoun policy, what kind of toll does that take as people react on social media? Is it the same toll as meeting people in person?
That's another good question. It's you have to listen to all the voices, I guess I would say. And sometimes you have to listen to voices that you might not agree with or they don't agree with you. So I think it's a tremendous amount of pressure on the premier as well as any, elected MLA. But at the same time, you're hearing other voices as well, too. Like you have to try to kind of find that middle ground. Do governments always get that right? No, I don't think they do. But you have to try and find that balance in between.
What kind of conversations were you having internally about social media and the role of it? And I ask that question because there were a number of times that the premier would post videos instead of having a news conference. So what role did social media come to play in your job and in the premier's office?
Well, social media, I should just note when I started, when Brad was still the premier, was in its infancy. I mean, I remember in the 2011 campaign, X or Twitter at the time had just started. I mean, we didn't even know what it was, if that makes sense, and then has morphed into, what it is today. So I think that social media has become a very effective vehicle for getting your message out. In addition, like I said, to some other traditional formats, which is frankly talking to folks like yourself in the mainstream media. But you do have to have a presence on social media, I think, as a government. I think as any political party, you need to have a presence there. People watch and read. So it's definitely taken into consideration. The videos you mentioned, a video post for a politician can be a very effective way to get your message out completely unfiltered. You are just talking, you're announcing, you're conveying a message, and it just comes out straight in video form. So that can be effective in that way. It's just your message for that day.
What about the transparency aspect of it, though? Because historically, announcements were made in front of the media,
right,
mainstream or otherwise, and then there were questions. The problem with putting a video straight to social media is that the only people that question you are the people on social media, and you don't necessarily have to respond to those questions. What's the logistics behind that?
Well, I guess I would say, well, first of all, it might be actually tougher to take questions on social media than with the mainstream media. But I would say this, we always endeavored to, and I think, Premier Moe still does this, it's the balance. So you're going to do a video. You're right. There's no formalized scrum immediately following a video launch like that. But we always tried to balance it off with making him available at another point to answer those questions, to talk to the media directly and answer whether it's technicalities about the announcement itself, why they came to that decision. We tried to balance that off.
Who runs Scott Moe's media channels?
Well, most folks would be surprised. It's not a tremendously large team. We know when I was there was a couple of great guys. I'm not going to name them. I'll keep them anonymous, but just a couple of great guys that worked in our office that manage, they contribute in terms of putting together the content, graphic design, as well as monitoring social media in terms of who is commenting, how many views a particular post is getting. So it's really just a couple of folks. And as much as it bothers me as a former staffer to say this, folks probably be surprised the Premier actually has a lot of input, even though some days we would say to him, please don't tweet by yourself or do that. But, the Premier's very engaged in it. Oftentimes when something is going on social media, folks maybe think somebody else in a room is doing this and down the hall and he doesn't know. He knows. He views all of his posts prior to them going out. He's been great at sourcing some of his own content as well, too. He's really attuned to what's going on in his constituency. So if he hears of a great community story, some great achievement that somebody in his constituency or elsewhere in Saskatchewan has done, he often likes to post that stuff, get it a few more views, get that great story out there.
Does he post and run, or does he post and then read the responses?
I would say for the most part, it's a post and run is maybe a strong word.
Duck and cover?
I would say, again, everything with a grain of salt. He knows when something gets posted, going to be some people that don't like it. There are some people that do like it. And so it's less about spending time reading the comments. He's also very busy. As most elected folks are, they don't have time to be sitting around on any of the platforms combing through all the comments. It's just not enough time in the day to do that.
Is there anything nefarious in those comments? Did you, as his chief of staff, things can get pretty dark on the internet. Was there ever a time that you or your staff were concerned about safety or threats or anything, whether it was through the pandemic or otherwise?
There was. I'm being honest. I think that there were a couple. Very rare, I want to note that.
Yeah,
but there
of course.
were a couple of comments that crossed the line from being appropriate and were deemed to be threatening in nature. This was somewhat publicized during COVID. Unfortunately, Dr. Shahab, our chief medical health officer, experienced some online comments that were very inappropriate. At that point, the staff that work in the digital team just immediately turned those over to the Premier's security division, as well as, the RCMP have a mechanism to look into those things. It's so rare, though, thankfully. It's so rare. But people do need to realize, joking or otherwise, if you post something that is using very inappropriate language or could be deemed threatening, that is a very, very serious thing to do, and it could cause it to have to be reported.
You do obviously give credence to those threats and handle those very seriously.
Absolutely.
How much credence do you give to the other ones?
Well, listen, social media is loud. It is what it is. It's loud. Unlike having those face-to-face conversations, say in your constituency office or on Coffee Row, there is a little level of, anonymity on social media that we have to take into account. You can't always verify who the source is, who it is that is making the post. And so in that respect, you have to kind of balance it off again. You're not always sure where those comments are coming from. Sometimes you don't even know if they're coming from a person who lives in the province, as one example.
Right. Okay, so a lot of the comments these days on the social media, the socials as they call them, a lot of them are about wanting Saskatchewan to leave Canada. We've heard a lot about Western alienation over the years. This is not new. Political columnist Murray Mandrick says Scott Moe is pandering to the same disgruntled group we saw during the pandemic and through the development of the pronoun policy. Here's some of what Murray said to Morning Edition host Adam Hunter.
He made a huge mistake giving Nadine Ness and Unified Grassroots any kind of credibility, which he did during COVID. She is now one of the people leading the charge, and she'd be happy to hear that, I'm sure, because she loves the publicity. She represents no one. She can't get elected to anybody. They've just defeated the Saskatchewan United Party, which is basically was in line with more of these thought processes in terms of the anti-COVID, anti-vax alienation people that fed into that. So Scott Moe has to realize that this is not his base, that placating these people, he's still going to win his rural seats anyway, and it's not adding anything to the basket for Scott Moe. He needs to build support in that middle area, urban Saskatchewan, as Brad Wall used to call the suburban soccer moms and everything else. That's where he needs to grow his support base, and I don't think he fully recognizes that, because from what I saw in that scrum yesterday, his inability just to simply say, yeah, I condemn those trying to break up my country. That's an easy thing for a premier to say. He wouldn't say it. And I think we have to start raising questions as to, well, why won't you say it? If you have a party whose constitution says they support a strong Saskatchewan within a united Canada, you have to basically live by that. And as a premier, that is what your oath says. So please maybe send a more direct message to the people out there that don't get that we have to stay within the Canada. I can't speak for Alberta, but I find it so patently ridiculous that anybody would think that we would be better off by having a separatist movement, basically giving the signals that our economy isn't stable, that all the things that Scott Moe is working for shouldn't be built upon, because one of the things that is true is Mark Carney, I think, said in his letter to the premiers, we can't have 13 strong economies. We need one strong national economy, and Saskatchewan is a big part of that. Build on that part.
Shannon, what do you make of what Murray had to say?
Well, I think that there might be a little underestimation in the amount of concern that there is in not only Western Canada, frankly, but in other areas of this country where they felt like over the past 10 years, this federal government wasn't respecting their jurisdiction, wasn't supporting their economies, and wasn't hearing their concerns. And I think that sometimes the word separation gets chucked into this discussion, and I don't want to see it downplay the real concerns and frustration that Western Canadians have, Saskatchewan people have. Murray talked about a couple of key individuals who were a bit more prominent during COVID and such. It's not just about any one person. There are a number of voices. There are a number of Saskatchewan residents that are concerned. They want to be a part of Canada, but they need to feel valued to feel that they're a part of Canada.
Is the squeaky wheel getting the grease in those cases?
Perhaps, again, depending on what vehicles reforms we're looking at. It's loud. There are people, I don't know how many there are, to be fair, in both Alberta and Saskatchewan that have tossed out that term separation. I think what's important, though, is to focus on the voices that are in these leadership roles. And I know from hearing some of Premier Moe's comments, even as late as last week, he's not interested in entering into, as he said, this straw man argument or debate where there's only two choices here. He is beyond hopeful that there is actually a choice that would have this federal government working with Saskatchewan, working with Alberta.
When we talk about the policies that have been the most contentious in Saskatchewan, let's say over the last 3-4 years, whose voices are you considering when you're advising on policies and helping the Premier in the direction and caucus in the direction that they're going to go?
Well, first of all, it's the voices of Saskatchewan residents. It's the voices of leaders within particular industries. It's no secret. I mean, this government has had a huge concern with federal policies that have appeared to be attacking particular industries, economic driving industries in Western Canada. So that is first and foremost. They always want to hear from those industries, those employers, about how this impacts them. Again, average, everyday folks reach out to their members of the Legislative Assembly all the time, not just on social media, and they express their concerns about how some of the federal policies have impacted their daily lives.
What about people who are new to Saskatchewan, who are making this their home and may not be part of the oil and gas sector, for example? How much of a role do the opinions of people who've chosen to help us grow our province have in the say of where things are going?
Oh, just as important. Just as important, I would say. Again, I think it. You have to approach those people or gain access to them through different forums. But just as important, part of the reason people want to move to Saskatchewan, which is fantastic, is because of the potential here. That's growth. That's economic potential. They want to live in a place that does afford its citizens the opportunity to get a job, raise their families here, and economic growth and stability. It's not just a cheesy political line. It really does pay for things. It pays for hospitals. It pays for schools. It pays for critical frontline service delivery.
Scott Moe has taken quite the measured response to Mark Carney being elected. He says he's willing to reset the relationship with Ottawa. Much of Moe's success has been railing against the Trudeau government. We know that their relationship wasn't great. But he was trying to stand up for Saskatchewan, particularly with the carbon tax, which Mark Carney removed, the consumer carbon tax. What do you make of the Premier's stance right now, when you, just having said, people in the West particularly have felt maybe ignored by the Liberal government, and now he's saying he's willing to work with the new Prime Minister. What do you make of his stance and his messaging right now?
I wasn't surprised by it, as much as this might be hard to believe after this past decade. And to be sure, there were many, many difficult moments with the Liberal government and with former Prime Minister Trudeau. At every turn, Premier Moe sincerely did try to make that effort. Call it a reset, call it consultation. He sincerely did try. There were just multiple moments where he did not have the luxury of accepting what was happening because he knew it wasn't in Saskatchewan's best interest. So I think he's sincere in this effort. I really do. I think him and Premier Smith both last week seemed cautiously optimistic based on their first phone call and discussion with Prime Minister Carney. So we'll see. But he is always going to defend Saskatchewan. He will always make that the top priority. So if the status quo looks like it is on, he is going to be vocal about that.
What would you make of his messaging going forward? Where do you think things with. I mean, you're now out. So you can. I mean, I'm sure you're still connected. I'm sure you still talk to him. I'm not completely assuming you leave and you're like, you know what, we're not friends anymore.
Yeah, I don't think I've been shunned yet.
After
so.
one, that's a close working relationship.
Absolutely.
Where do you, as your political consultant, where do you think his message needs to be going forward now?
Frankly, right now, I think right in the spot that it's in. He's spoken to the new prime minister. He's talked to him about the concerns, and he very much hopes that Saskatchewan is going to have a true place within Team Canada. That is his hope, and I think this is the right spot. I think they've had, from what he said publicly, they had some discussions about some of the priorities and the policies of, and again, I'll call it maybe the old iteration of the Liberal government, even though they're reelected. And I think, he's been quite clear and where he thinks those need to go. I know he said last week he hopes that even to have this initial discussion, like let's have some consultation here before these things get implemented. Hear us out. Let us contribute to the makeup of these policies. So I think he's really hopeful that Saskatchewan will have a chance to do that.
Do you think it's that Mr. Carney has made him feel more heard than Justin Trudeau did?
I think that's possible, yes.
It's a very short period of time to change the relationship when you consider how fractured it really was over the years. That sometimes it seemed more like maybe Scott Moe was running against Justin Trudeau more than Ryan Miley in that one election. Things were so rough, to put it that way. So if people are listening and they're thinking, I want to be heard, I have a social media account, I spend most of my time arguing with people who aren't politicians, what's the best way to be heard by a politician if you have a concern?
Well, social media is definitely a way to do it. Again, I'm not going to downplay that. The voices there are heard and listened to. I would say, though, that it's high volume and it's high traffic there. There's a number of mechanisms that folks can use to be heard. I still really think it's that good old-fashioned, have you called your MLA? Call your MLA, drop them a note, explain to them your concerns. They can be so responsive. And to be fair, that's both sides of the House. I think the opposition members have always done a very good job at that as well, too. So have your voice heard that way. You'd be surprised. I know for our caucus, I can't speak for all caucuses, you're very likely to get a call back. They're highly responsive in that way. Might take a little bit of time, and there's, a lot of calls coming in. They'll get back to you.
Shannon, thanks so much for pulling back the curtain and giving us a little picture of how things work behind the scenes.
Not a problem at all. Happy to be here.